Hi everyone, I'm Yumna Hussain, and this is a session that I'm really excited about because as a youth advocate for Birmingham, campaigning for young people's voices to be directly embedded within decision making and policy making, one of the main areas that I'm really passionate about is food. Everyone, deserves access to healthy and nutritious food no matter where they live, but right now that's not our reality. And today's session is all about, regenerating our food system so that it's healthier and it's more just for people on the planet. So yeah, this is a session that I'm really excited about. I'm the chair of Birmingham Youth Board at Bikeback 2030, and Bikeback 2030 is a youth-led organisation with the main aim of halving childhood obesity rates by 2030 by building powerful alliances with industry, with business, with government. And we have campaigns ranging from school food to junk food marketing and also sports sponsorships, as well as being an ambassador for the Food Foundation, which is a charity working as well with similar aims, and a core group member of Act Food, Act for Change, which is an initiative that campaigns on this exact topic on a global level. So I just wanted to give, some of the reality of the situation right now. 1 in 10 people in the UK received a food bank parcel in the last 12 months alone. There are reports of people declining potatoes at food banks because they can't afford the energy to heat them. And at the same time, our farming system has taken us to a place where we've lost 70% of our biodiversity since 1970, and we have 40 years worth of soil left. So is it really so hard to imagine a food system that actually feeds everyone, whilst at the same time regenerating the world? By the end of this session, I hope it won't be. Together tonight, we're bringing 4 speakers from very different backgrounds and places, each of whom will offer a different experience on what exactly a regenerative food system is and what it would look like if we actually created one. So I think it's time for us to get started, and I'm going to hand back over to Rob. But yes, this is a session that I'm really excited for.
We're going to start this evening with 2, for me, great practitioners of building a regenerative food system. 3 great practitioners, in fact, of building a regenerative food system. The first up is Andrew Whitley. So Andrew is a baker, author, co-founder of the Real Bread campaign, guest on next week's episode of the podcast that I do, From What If to What Next. He started an organic bakery in Cumbria in the 1970s. His work in his book Bread Matters has been credited with changing the way we think about bread by the BBC Food and Farming Awards. From 2010 to 2012, Andrew grew a small organic agroforestry project in the Scottish borders and began researching historic cereal varieties, work that led to the founding of Scotland Bread, which I love, such a great name, a community benefit society based in Fife, which proposes a Scottish grain and bread supply that is diverse, healthy, equitable, locally controlled and sustainable. In 2021, his Flour to the People, you can get a sense of his love of puns as we go through here. Project won an innovation category in the BBC Food and Farming Awards. Andrew, your 10 minutes to tell us about regenerative food culture starts now. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for that welcome and introduction, Rob. Good evening from Scotland, from Fife now, not the Scottish borders. I moved 2 years ago. Ladies and gentlemen, bread matters. It is at the heart of our food system. It's broken, like the food system is. I'm going to tell you why I think that's the case, and I'm going to tell you about how Scotland the Bread, a small community benefit society, is trying to grow a better grain and bread system, one that's fair to all people, inquisitive and respectful of the diverse microorganisms at work in soils, cereals, seeds, sourdoughs, stomachs, and society, and aimed at addressing the 2 great crises of our times, climate and biodiversity. My focus is on Scotland, but similar issues affect both the UK and other rich countries, and actually also low or middle income countries where a nutrition transition towards energy-dense, ultra-processed foods is creating dependence on global commodity markets and undermining local farmers, compounding income inequality, and creating the paradox of over and undernutrition existing in the same communities, sometimes even in the same families. Now I'm going to try and share my screen, so bear with me. So what I was hoping to do was to share with you the size of the problem in Scotland by means of these figures here. I don't want to go through them all, but just to indicate the enormous problem that that is visible in Scotland in a situation which is slightly more concentrated than in other countries, which are to varying degrees more self-sufficient in their wheat and bread supply. Scotland's a particularly disjointed and dislocated one, and you can see from the figures have changed slightly since I produced this slide a few years ago, but actually the relationship between them and a possible future would actually remain pretty much the same. Just to give you an indication, somebody in responding to the UK government's temporary postponement of measures to deal with the obesity crisis on the radio the day before yesterday was saying that the cost of obesity in England is already now £18 billion a year, and clearly this is growing all the time. In relation to the nature of our food system, which is is as I'm trying to indicate here, one which is not fit for purpose and not addressing the things that we need. So I'm going to stop screen sharing and go back to my script. What I wanted to say was that the Scottish system is characterised by farmers being paid to produce very high yields of grain, using massive inputs of fossil-based fertiliser and other inputs, biocides and so on, and varieties of grain that have fewer important nutrients in them than was true 50 years ago. Most of this grain is in Scotland goes to feed animals or to make alcohol or bioethanol for vehicles. If it's intended for milling and bread making, then millers remove the majority of what nutrients there are in the grain to make ultra refined white flour. And in the UK since 1953, this has been regarded as unfit for human consumption unless the miller adds back chalk, iron and 2B vitamins, synthetic ones, to replace some of the missing nutrients. And finally, industrial bakers use a load of additives and ultra-fast high-energy processing to make a loaf in which fermentation has not been enabled to perform its vital function of making nutrients available to our digestive systems and modifying some of the gluten proteins that some people find hard to tolerate. And this bread is usually the cheapest and most accessible in our highly concentrated supermarket system. So I think we need to address each of these stages in the journey of our grain from soil to slice. It's no good improving only one if the others remain the same, or expecting those corporations who created, control and profit from the status quo to lead its replacement with a fairer, healthier system. Scotland the Bread aims to be a proof of concept of a fairer food system. And what we aim to show is how we can rebuild relationships of trust between farmers, bakers, and eaters of bread. Well, how? And the way we're doing it is we research and grow more nutrient-dense varieties, evolutionary mixtures, populations, land races of grains that thrive in low-input agroecological and regenerative farming systems. We mill them in very low-energy mills on the farm into wholemeal flour with no waste, and we supply individuals, community bakeries, and food hubs. And we train people in the fermentation techniques that bring out the best in our flour so that everyone can eat it. It all adds up to less and better. and we say fewer slices of more nutrient-dense bread mean less pressure on our belts, our budgets, and on the biosphere. In practice, we're working on a concept of the people's bread based on asserting the human right to food and addressing the historic injustice that poor people had no alternative but to eat the poorest quality food, of which bread was a large component over history. And we're building on initiatives such as the Flour to the People project, which Rob mentioned had won an award last year, which was prompted by flour and bread shortages in lockdown. So finally, if you think there's something good in our approach, you may well be wondering how on earth we take this to scale, as people often say these days, as soon as they've had a good idea. My answer is this: if a fairer food system is our aim, it requires a radical dispersal of power, not a replacement of current oligarchies with better people running the same structures. And if the only possible future for humanity requires circular and regenerative approaches, we need to replace linear exponential models of growth with something self-regulating and mutualistic. So we imagine growth by replication, or perhaps by slow fermentation, in the way that a yeast cell reproduces by dividing into two, even as it's working. In other words, producing the gas which raises our bread. In this spirit, I hope that something I've just said may lead to the replication of tiny but collectively powerful actions and to better bread for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. I really liked what you said at the end about how we should disperse power, especially in the food system, because I feel like big businesses, and especially when it comes to agriculture and farming, have a really strong hold, and I feel like a lot of the people who are consuming bread, especially from like low income households, it's become so harder for them to get staples like bread, and because of price surges and other issues. So yeah, I really like what you said at the end about, you know, power dispersal. Yeah, moving on to our second guest, Christian Jonnet joins us today from Liège in Belgium, where he's the founder of the Liège Food Belt in English. Centre Alimentaire, I can't speak French or any other language for the life of me, but Centre Alimentaire is one of the most bold and exciting attempts to localize the food systems of a city that we have yet seen. In the past 5 years, CATL have started 27 new cooperatives and raised over 5 million euros of community investment to start them. They have built and connected network of producers, retail outlets, food processing, a local currency, and so much more. It's a thrilling story that he can tell far much better than me. So Christian, over to you.
Hello, thank you for having me today. Do you hear me?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay. Please excuse me for my poor English, as I'm a French-speaking person. I have a screen that I can share with you. So, do you see it? Yeah. So, Centre Alimentaire's goal is about to co-construct a local, ecological and social food system. And if you want to locate where it's happening, it's in the region of Wallonia in Belgium, the French-speaking part of Belgium, and in the Liège agglomeration. And we are talking about 600,000 people, the population that is concerned by this project. And Liège is a place with a very heavy steel production past. So we have a lot of pollution, but also a lot of unemployment with globalization. And this city needs really to reinvent itself. And there is an opportunity in Liège. The fact that since the 1970s, there is a strong continuum between social and cultural movements. For instance, the alter globalization movement was very strong in Liège, and this movement could really build up on social and cultural networks that preceded them. And when the alter globalization movement faded, the the citizens came with the transition initiative that could also build up on the previous movement, on the previous cultural and social movements, on alter globalization movement, which counted more than 100 organizations. So you have this continuum in Liège. And what is it today? So it's a dynamic that emerged in 2013 as a Liège in Transition spin-off. And its mission is to promote the development of local sustainable food supply chains by raising awareness on this topic, supporting its stakeholders and facilitating their development. So today, these actors are brought together in an association, a non-profit organization with 60 members, 6 employees, and about 300 producers that are also collaborating with Ceinture Alimentaire. And so at the origin, we created an event that mobilized 600 persons. And we really tried to mobilize the creativity of the community around one question. Imagine that within one generation, maybe 30 years, at least 50% of the food consumed locally is produced locally under the best ecological and social conditions. And to answer collectively these questions, we used collective intelligence tools that were brought to us by the Transition Network. We used the open space technology and not only created it a very big enthusiasm, but it helped us really to build a plan of action together. Now, this food belt also was inspired by a scientific theory, the multi-level perspective, as a scientific transition frameworks that says that to build a transition of a system, you need to work on not only on markets and on users' preference, but also on culture, on technology, on policy. So you need to be really systemic, to go systemic on these problems. And knowing that, we try to build with all these citizens, with these producers, these scientifics that came together, 600 person, a shared and systemic strategy with many topics. We understood that we needed to create citizen awareness and involvement, to develop partnership with local authorities, to work on the creation of the missing links in local food chains, to work on training and business development support, to work on access to finance, access to land, also on logistics organizations. As you can see, you have something that is very systemic. You have to work on everything at the same time. That's the first thing. We had this shared strategy, but also these even created really enthusiasm and a boom for new activities and new food initiatives. For instance, more than 100 new vegetable producers created their activities since that. And also, which is remarkable, about 20 new cooperatives were created in the area of Liège for producing sustainable food, processing food, or distributing food. That's really something important in what's happening in Liège. And maybe I can I can tell you why it's important to build these networks around cooperatives, notably because of agricultural precariousness. Maybe you know that the average agricultural income in Europe is around 40% of the average European income. So if you want to build new food systems for production, you need to have a fair food system. And that's why cooperatives are important. So here I'm making a short focus on one cooperative that Rob knows very well, Les Petits Producteurs. It's a cooperative that you visited, Rob. It was created in 2017. Now it has 4 shops, 25 employees. And it's a not-for-profit organization. and it's really trying hard to reduce the co-op's margin, to have prices that are more affordable for the producer, but also to have higher incomes for the producer. And how do you do that? By notably limiting strictly the capital return for the people who invest in it. And you also have a policy where the resource of the cooperative are used to support really the producers. I will build on that. And you have no negotiation of the price with the producers. So that's a lot of things that make the difference in terms of a fairer food system. And also you have a total transparency on origin of food of food and ingredients, on purchasing price, on the breakdown of the selling price. Just you see that's very different from the mainstream commerce. And I told you that a cooperative like Les Petits Producteurs is using its resources to support the producers. For instance, here you have a project named Les Pousse Pousse. You have 3 vegetable growers who could install, with the help for one part of the Liège food belt, who gave technical support for building a community-supported agriculture. You had support from the city of Liège, who gave land freely for 20 years to start this activity. And you also had support from this cooperative, Les Petits Producteurs, the small producers, who used its capital to help investing on this land and installing these 3 vegetable growers. And also they have offered them the opportunity to work in the shop part-time. So you have a whole lot of a partnership with public and private organizations that make sure that the food producers that are installing can make their job in a system that is really fair, and so they can have a wage, a salary that is really acceptable. That's the kind of innovation that we are trying to build and to spread in the Liège food belt. But to manage this plan, we also need to really manage to mobilize the citizens. That's why in 2017 we created a festival, the Nourrir Liège Festival. It means feeding Liège, and every year it gathers then more than 150 organizations that are partners and nearly 200 activities, and it touches every year about 10,000 people. It's really a big tool, a very useful tool for the mobilization of the population around the transition objective for our territory. And with the Festival Nourrir Liège, we understood that we needed a place that is permanent for for making this citizen awareness and involvement. So that's why we created with the city of Liège the House of Sustainable and Inclusive Food. And it's now operational, and it's a permanent place, really in the center of the city, where you can get trained about how to grow food, process it, and so on. And the involvement of the local authorities goes not only in this field, but for instance, the city of Liège has made a commitment, not a comment, a commitment that by 2014, 100 of school and nurseries meals will be organic, seasonal, and local, and as local as possible. We're talking about 3,000 meals every day. Also, the city of Liège is involved with the Liège food belt in creating a food hub, a sustainable food hub, that will be operational the 1st of June this year, with the logistics hub, the vegetable cannery, jar and bottle washer unit, meat cutting workshop, processing workshop. And so it's the transformation of a whole neighborhood in Liège with these activities. And you see here at the right, the first building, that was bought by the city of Liège, €2 million to bring in the first activities about it. So that's this building, but we have perspective with the city of Liège to have many activities started in the same place. And last thing, we also are launching a food policy council, not only with the city of Liège, but with the 24 surrounding communes. And it's a partnership with the Liège University and the local authorities. And so what is the aim? It's about to scale up the movement and generate innovative alliance for food transition, to have a space for exchange and mutual knowledge, systematically disseminate successful projects and best practices, and to activate levels specific to municipalities. So here in Liège, to summarize, you have really an alliance between the state and the civil society to have a transformation of the food system and to have an effect on the market. And the movement is spreading. The first food belt was in Liège, but now we have 5 food belts in Wallonia. And together we are member of the Regional Food Council. The Food Policy Council are also spreading in Wallonia. We'll soon have 9 of them. And also the festival Nourrir Liège has new spin-offs. You have Nourrir Bruxelles and many cities, and it's even spreading now in France, in Strasbourg, and in Canada, in Quebec. Okay, I'm sorry, I hope I was not too long.
No, I could listen to you for hours, Christian. Thank you. And that's really great because you know, I come to Liège, and every time I come back, I just tell everybody how amazing it is, and it's really nice for them to hear it from you. And it's so inspiring what's happening in Liège. So thank you so much for that. So our third speaker is Mamadi Ujuaje, a community researcher and facilitator whose background is in food and nourishment practice and live art advocacy around food justice and autonomous food co-nurturing. She currently curates with community-centered knowledge learning journeys which explore the interfaces of community, modernity, and systemic justice through the roots of art, culture, and embodying the relationship with the more than human. So having lived and worked in East and West Africa and the Caribbean, Mamadi has traversed physiologies and psychologies of nourishment in different contexts. And she says of her work that it brings alchemy to the ordinary. As far as I'm concerned, anyone who can bring alchemy to the ordinary is exactly the kind of person that we need to have speaking at the Together We Can Summit. Mamadi, we would love to hear your thoughts, please, on what a regenerative food culture means to you. You're most welcome.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Rob, and thank you to the 2 previous speakers. I'm here as Mamadi, hoping to invoke the larger we that is possible within that title, Together We Can. That we is the we of Ubuntu. I don't know if you've heard of the concept, the idea of Ubuntu. It comes from the Nguni people, who are Zulu people in Southern Africa. So Ubuntu, one of the ideas, expressions of Ubuntu is that no person is really human unless they can recognize their deep connection to all other people, all other beings. So within Ubuntu, we can do nothing but be fair. However, I want to say that I'm not really sure about the use of the word food in the title. Food has come to mean so many things, but critically, it tends to be limited to that which is about the exchange between what I feel is quite a limited idea of a producer and an equally limited idea of a consumer. 2 important points in discussions about food systems. So I have decided to replace the word food in many of my conversations with the word nourishment. And I understand that nourishment is an outcome of sound cultivation, not just of the earth, but also of each other, of all beings. What people refer to as the more than human, cultivation also of all of our futures. And, although this might sound a bit strange, cultivation also of our pasts. And, you know, how does one cultivate one's past? I feel that we can cultivate our past by working on everything that has led up to the present state of less than balance, of imbalance, of injustices. That means that we have to pass through a portal of trauma, all of our traumas, all of that which has shaped our inability to make the kinds of choices which can accord with Ubuntu. Yeah, I am because we are because I am is another expression of Ubuntu. It's about interdependency. I feel that we can't really talk about regeneration or regenerativeness, if that's a word, if we have not really understood what has first led to our generativeness in the first place, and how all of our bodies are instrumental to that. And I say bodies, all of our bodies. I'm not just talking about the Cartesian mind, you know, the I think, therefore I am. For me, it is more about it is I be, therefore I am. It's not I do, therefore I am, or I have, therefore I am, as is in the case of the modern, what I'm going to refer to as Wetiko living. Wetiko is an idea of the insatiable greed, a monster with insatiable greed. The Wetiko living that we all tend to participate in, where our insatiable selves transport ourselves into an empty future, empty of humans at least. What I'm saying is that there's so much to revisit before we can take the kind of steps that lead to justice. Because for me, the title, Creating a Regenerative and Fairer Food System, is about justice. The systems of cultivating nourishment are not going to come about through avoidance of our past violations of the life through which we can be and be abundantly. We have so much to learn from the more than human worlds. I like to think about us, you know, it is said that humans have been on Earth for about 300,000 years at the most. But trees have been here for about, well, you know, multiples of that, 3.84 billion years. Yeah. So we stand to learn a lot from many of the elder beings around us, you know. So it seems to me that these worlds and the other worlds of humans whose humanity has yet to be fully recognized by all of the structures of modernity through which we act out a living, unless we're listening in very profound ways, you know, we're not really learning. I do agree that together we can. In fact, together we must. It cannot, though, be through individualized or atomized acts of sacrifice or sabotage. We must be in Ubuntu, in interdependency, in order to realize our shared beingness and our continuity with nature, through which we tend to articulate ideas of regeneration. Many of the world's people who do not benefit from the current systematization of the circulations of what passes for food, who are most of us, are calling for a pause and a rethink. In fact, more than a think, a re-embodiment of how we be. In that pause, we can recall our whole selves. We can take time to listen to all that speaks. We can move more slowly. We do not need to be like, I don't know if people have heard of Chicken Licken in the story, Chicken Licken, who was on his way to tell the king that the sky was falling, or because an acorn had fallen on his head. He was, nevertheless, in the course of the story, he rushes alongside all the rest of the farmyard, headlong into the jaws of the fox. Is that where we want to end up? In this necessary pause, we can begin to process our related trauma and to come to our senses. It might even take us to be led by our senses to discover the precise dimensions of that trauma and to help us to discover ways of healing that can enable us to be fully humans, expressing Ubuntu and being in full nourishment. I talk about being led by our senses because one of the journeys, the food journey that community-centered knowledge runs, is one that is very sensory. It's a multi-sensory experience in which we trace ideas about the food system, about food systems. In so many countries around the world, we are being fed a terrible concoction. We call it food. But this results from the unhealed nature of ourselves inflicted upon the rest of the planet. We falsely believe that the earth belongs to us, rather than acknowledging that we belong to the earth. As such, we move at the pace of greed and lust, as more and more disconnected from each other and more connected to that which we have created out of our limited experience of life, out of the lack of conversations with our elder beings upon the planet. Together we can, yes, definitely. Together we must, and we must also repair ourselves in order to do so. Thank you. I think that's my 10 minutes.
Thank you so much. That was beautiful, and I loved the concept of Ubuntu. Like, I've heard about it so many times, and I am because we are. It really like brings together like what the summit is about, of that community-based thing. Food is such an integral part of our day. Like, it's the one thing that people need to have, like, to survive. And so like it's an action, like it's a community thing. You eat food with your friends, with your family, and to repair our relationship with food, you were saying we need to repair ourselves, and like as individuals but also as a community, which I really believe in as well. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. That was beautiful. Our final speaker, Daniel Christian Wahl. Daniel is one of the catalysts of the movement around regeneration and the author of Designing Regenerative Cultures. He works as a consultant, educator, and activist with NGOs, businesses, governments, and change agents. Daniel lives in Mallorca, Spain in 2010, where he is quite literally growing roots and deepening his practice of facilitating bioregional regeneration. His book has quickly gained international acclaim. His vlog on Medium is followed by over 24,000 people, and his social media advocacy has a combined audience of over 850,000 people around the world. Daniel, welcome. We'd love to hear your reflections on what you've heard and what it is that we can pull out of what we've heard that makes it regenerative. What do you mean by regenerative? In what ways do some of your stories embody it? And what suggestions do you have for anyone listening who wants to make their work more deeply rooted in regenerative culture? Daniel, you've got 10 minutes and the floor is yours. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you for all the wonderful contributions, and thanks to Rob for inviting me. You might hear from my voice, I've been ill for the last 6 weeks by now, 3 flus in a row. So I'm really glad I made it. It was a bit uncertain. And I think starting at the end, because Mamadi basically told us what regeneration is all about. And I think one of the things that for me is most important is because we have this habit of finding the next new fad. For a while it's sustainable, it's circular, it's lean, it's smart, whatever. And now for a lot of people, the fad is regenerative. If we miss the opportunity of pausing, like Mamadi was inviting, and realizing that what regenerative is trying to refer to is the very fundamental pattern by which life creates conditions conducive to life, by which life creates an abundant planet which we can all share in. And Mamadi also named this, that it's not just the human community, but it's the more than human community. And she also named the core switch that, like, what's really important is that people right now in this kind of chasing the new thing also make the mistake that regenerative cultures is some ideal utopian future that we one day need to co-create. And what Mamadi was reminding us beautifully is that in our 300,000-year journey or 200,000-year journey in the current version of human being, we have been regenerative cultures inhabiting our food regions in a way that nurtured these regions and made them more productive rather than less productive. When Cook arrived in Australia, he didn't see agriculture because it was so advanced that it wasn't as primitive as the plow agriculture that we have at the moment. And in many ways, once we recognize that regeneration is a core pattern of life, creation and regeneration and collapse are 3 core patterns which interact to create plenty of life. And then we can anchor ourselves in our own lineage of being capable of creating these food systems. And that's what I'm hearing from everybody else. And like I would say the one thing that I also heard Mamadi speaking to is like, let's watch out not to focus too much on one issue. Like food is a wonderful entry point. It brings us into everything. It brings us into health. It brings us into community, relationship to the land, relationship to the area that we don't grow food in, the tension between food and wild places, but also in my region where I live on an island in the Mediterranean, there's a close link to water. And with the modern food system, there's a close link to energy. And so what I'm hearing and what I'm kind of wanting to maybe sort of foreground a little bit is that we're actually talking about bioregional food systems. We're using the word local, but local here or place-based has a fractality. It needs to breathe. And from the local to the regional, and it also needs to breathe to the global, in the sense that in order to enable food systems that are more or less offering food sovereignty to the people in a certain bioregion or the food belt of a city. I love the way that Christian was this. I didn't know about this project, and I will also tell you a story a lot in the future. It's wonderful because for me, it's an example of a bioregional food system that integrates cities into the hinterland. It's exactly like in Scotland, Patrick Geddes was talking about this 120 years ago, that's how we need to plan cities. We need to connect them to their region. And it's also how we can avoid the kind of political situations that we see in the US, where rural populations feel disenfranchised. And I also heard in the story that he was telling, the 20 cooperatives, like amazing. That's regional, bioregional, economic regeneration. But what I'm kind of wanting again to foreground is we can't talk about food system without talking about water system, without talking about energy system. And because we have a habit as humanity to overswing the pendulum, we have such a broken global food system and globalized neoliberal economy, and we see the effects so insidiously everywhere that now we just want to swing the pendulum to the ultra local. And there's a lot of people who are reliving the old self-sufficiency story of like get friendly to 1 acre, 2 spades, and all of that. Like it edges almost on prepperdom. And I think what we're talking about here, both stories that Andrew and Christian were sharing, are much wider visionary stories of regional provisioning and done in an awareness, like I heard somewhere, as local as possible, that sometimes in the transition, there might be a time where getting chocolate might not be much of an option for us here in Europe because of transport costs. But right now, we could still have a production system that is mainly local, but doesn't try to produce everything local. So there is still some trade. And the other really important bit, and I'll finish on that, is that it needs to pay attention to things like fiber shed, like Andrew's wonderful, like he is in Fife. I encourage you, Andrew, to look at Journeys in Design. A guy called John Innes has worked on the fiber shed of Fife, looking at the old flax industry. And integrating these storylines of saying, how do we create fiber sheds? How do we create food sheds? How do we manage our water sovereignty? Maybe less of an issue in Scotland, but actually, no, you have droughts too. We have droughts everywhere, and we have climate change. Like today was the second hottest day ever recorded on this day in Parma, where I live. I talked to somebody in Zurich, they had the hottest day. So welcome to the new situation. But if we manage to hold true to what Mamadi was saying, that we are capable of healing the system we're part of, and that actually the wisdom of Ubuntu is that the only way that you can fully express your own individual gift to the community is in service to the larger whole. That's the ultimate process of how do we fit back in. Like I love, if you Google re-inhabitation, like inhabitation with a re in front of it, Gary Snyder, PDF, there's a little conversation popping up that he, like a talk that he gave in 1977. And this notion of re-inhabitation, particularly the last paragraph of that, read it, because it invites us to make ourselves complicit with the peasant and farmers of this world and begin to learn with them, because they're the remaining inhabitory people and the indigenous people of the world that still know how to live in deep relationship with the land. And of course, how do we do that with 8 billion people? And some people are saying those numbers will, by catastrophe, go down soon. And I don't find that's a comfortable place to start. So why don't we come to what Christian is doing, begin to work on food sovereignty at the bioregional scale, but do so with awareness that if we only meet the food people, we soon bump into the fiber people. And because we need to regionalize our entire material system, we need to regionalize our energy systems and all of that. And so the invitation is, when we talk food system, talk about it in the wider context of a bioregional change. But thank you so much for sharing these amazing stories. And also, last thing, with it is ultimately I be, therefore I am. I love that. It's a change for all of us in the way that we relate to the people who grow our food, and that we invest in them. Like the guy who brings us our vegetables and grows chickens didn't know how to pay for the chicken feed. And so I said, well, I'll just pay you a year in advance, basically reinventing the CSA system on a personal trust basis. And it helped them out. And that kind of relationship building, we can all do in one way or another, of deepening the relationship to the people who grow our food in the wider context of the bioregion. I think I'll leave it there because we've got a lovely conversation coming.
Daniel, thank you so much. And yeah, and sorry to hear about your health problems that you've been having, and we're honoured that you could join us this evening. Thank you. And wow, this has this is already there's questions starting to appear in the chat, which is as we like it. We've got two things we're going to do before that. In a moment, we're going to put you into a pair for a bit of digestion time. There's been a lot of stuff in there. One of my things I love this evening, you know, we all get into the habit of using our pronouns after our names on emails or in when we're on Zooms. I loved seeing Mama D's was we, us, ours, which I've not seen before, and I might adopt that. I love that. So the first thing is we're just going to go to Dan, who is going to share the Mentimeter, what's come out of the Mentimeter. And
I am.
Breakouts. Dan, what you got?
Well, amazing. We've had 37 responses to the Mentimeter. So here they are. I'm going to have to scroll down them as you go. Rob, do you want to read them out? Have a look at them and offer any reflections as I go down the screen.
Muted. 4 new community market gardens, food alternatives for upper middle class people. More community gardens and allotments, public subsidies, rising public demand, ending food banks by creating food co-ops in every neighborhood, more plant-based eating, education to avoid food waste. In Milton Keynes, we have community fridges and larders. Much agricultural land is being built on. We have little local food. There is many community gardens, but we need more. We have a community fridge system at www.yoku.uk. We're working as a local community, develop land, community-led growing spaces scattered across a mixed-use neighborhood. That's disappeared on me.
Sorry. My fault.
Shimmying up and down.
Sorry, my fault.
We're running a farm start project based on regenerative agriculture, permaculture principles. We need more of this. We'd like a community garden. In my area, we have libraries which have a small space for fruit trees, herbs, etc., railway street gardens and a community allotment. Community fridges, co-op farming, transition bring and share project. Hoping we can get back to when our local fields grew wheat and potatoes rather than grass for horses and sheep. Start by getting people growing micro plots of wheat. Imagine the possibilities. Seed sharing, community gardens, allotments, orchards. Looking to start a community growing project. Distributing surplus food from supermarkets, restaurants and farms. Open food network. Digital shop for farmers and food hubs. The open food network is a brilliant thing. Check it out. Tiny allotments. Going on the principle if you build it, they will come. Making a water wheel to grind mill and flour for the local community. Open to everyone, food growing classes on everyone's streets, more youth involvement. I don't think I've done all of them, but there's a selection. 3 community market gardens just started, 1 food forest garden, fantastic. Understanding how our circular economies can play a part in our food systems.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Responses.
We're just going to ask each of our speakers again if they having heard the other 3 speakers, if they had anything they'd like to reflect on what they've heard, just for a minute or minute and a half or something like that. Andrew, is there anything that stood out for you or inspired you or really, anything you'd like to reflect on of what you've heard from everybody else?
Really difficult to narrow it down because each person's intervention was inspiring and thought-provoking in different and overlapping ways. So I think I was inspired by Christian just in terms of the scale compared to the modest efforts that we're trying to begin in Scotland. You know, doing stuff at a city level and managing to persuade a local authority to put serious money into infrastructure is just so brilliant. I, like you, Rob, have quoted Liège as an example of what we're trying to aim towards as often as I can find people to listen to me. I'm particularly interested in the way in which the thing kicked off with an open network event, which your network facilitated in some way. I'd like to find out more about that because we want to do something like that with a very small sort of rural-based centre that we're trying to create here called the Fife Fermenter, a place for seeing grains differently and bringing together everybody who can reimagine our grain system using the skills and insights of molecular biologists, farmers, plant breeders, storytellers, visual artists, musicians, choreographers, you name it, everybody who can help us to understand this, how we can actually engage with our grain and bread system in a way that rebuilds that sort of link of health that should be running through the system from soil to slice, in which I was also sort of my thinking on this was enriched enormously by what Mamadi had to say, giving it that sort of framework that I always struggle to put into words of an understanding that I think we all have at some level, that that when we say for instance, we've made a loaf of bread, what we really mean is that we've been a kind of, at best, a facilitator or a curator of the real work being done by hidden multitudes of microorganisms, the key attribute of which is that they're working in a mutualistic and balanced and symbiotic way, rather than a grasping, adding every organism's selfishness to all the others and hoping something good will come out of that. So thank you for those two particular things, but it's all been most illuminating to me.
Thank you. Thank you. And Christian.
Do you hear me?
Perfect.
Okay. It was very interesting for me. The situation described by Andrew about what's happening in Scotland with wheat and bread production is very similar. What's happening in our region, in Wallonia, we have the same kind of diagnosis and project. So that's interesting. Regarding the fact that we are astonished that we have such a massive involvement and investment from the local authorities, that's something that was not evident initially when we started Liège in transition. Initially, we were not taken seriously, very much seriously by the local authorities, but it's really by creating these cooperatives, creating jobs, economical activity, that they started to believe that we're credible persons, and they started to negotiate with us. And also the festival, the Feeding Liège festival, made them realize that it's a subject that's very important, and that's where they started to really involve in the food transition project. I would like to say that I was very inspired by Mamadi and Daniel testimonies. I heard that it's necessary to pause and rethink, to recall our whole selves, to move more slowly. And that's exactly what we're not doing in Liège. We don't find the time to do that. We are in action all the time, like in permanent acceleration. It's like creating a never-ending growing dynamic. So I hope that this kind of situation, we are not losing our connection to the ground and to our roots. But I really understand, and also think that sometimes you need to pause and rethink. So thank you for this testimony. And Daniel, yes, also I also like the concept of bioregional food system and the need to integrate this idea in a wider context with the water system and the energy system. That's something that maybe we'll take into consideration. And regarding the concept of food sovereignty, when we say as local as possible, it's really not an autarky project. It's really important for us to stay open to other territories, other realities, to solidarity. And for instance, we are creating very strong links with similar cooperatives in the south of Europe, in Spain, in Portugal, in Greece, in Italy, that are struggling for fairer and healthier food systems. And with these kind of cooperatives and territories, we are really searching for complementarities and solidarity. So it's really not about closing everything down and being in autarky, but about really food sovereignty for everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mamadi, any reflections?
Yes, it was very interesting hearing all of you. I kind of put it into this kind of, I don't know, flow of history. I felt that what was shared from Scotland was like, from Andrew in Scotland, was some of the histories of why we have to rethink and why we have to do things differently, talking about, you know, the animal feed and alcohol overproduction in terms of where the wheat is going, ultra refinement and obesity in terms of what's being consumed. And therefore that, you know, that driving the need to respond to history. And then, you know, that flowing into the whole experience in Liège with Christian, and that's very much like the present. I've been involved in food sovereignty activism. I see that people are taking these kinds of initiatives, not as successfully at the scale you're doing it, Christian, but they're taking, you know, their power into their hands to do similar kinds of activities. And something about being the present with the kind of levels of work you talked about, how much you're engaged in it, so it's difficult to find time, you say. It's interesting not to be like overwhelmed with the need to meet demand and outcomes, and it's like, well, yes, I mean, but what does your local sycamore tree think of all of this? You know, it's been around for hundreds of years. What is it thinking about, you know, Christian when he's like going to bed at 12 o'clock? I don't know if you do that, but so yeah, there's something about the presentness of the presence of the present. And yeah, I think there's lots to say. What can I say about Daniel? I got no comment. It's like we touch so much resonance. I think it's so important that he brought about the need to interconnect with all other life systems, and we refer to them as systems. They don't refer to themselves as such, right? We tend to systematize. We want to make boxes and lines between everything and organize it in a very I'm going to literally say a man-conscious way. I don't know, you know, like what all the women are going to say about this, and, you know, other genders as well. But yeah, I mean, it's so important to keep things connected and to recognize that the ultra local has its place, but connection between the farmer in Guatemala and the one in Greece and the one in somewhere else beginning with G, come on, Georgia, right? They have to have a conversation that is meaningful. And without that meaningful conversation, what sense making are we really making as humans on this planet? Right. So yeah, I want to see if I could pay for tickets for you to go to those 3G places, Christian and Andrew. I would, you know, and have conversations with people's realities in those places and see what does it really take to have a Liège down in you know, in Uttar Pradesh and you know, in Jamaica, right? You know, what does it really take? What will you face when trying to do the same thing there? I'd love to, I really would love to experience your conversation after spending a year in Belize or something, you know, and meeting what the oppositions that are met. So I just thought it was great. And thank you so much, Robin and team, for bringing this conversation together. Yeah.
Daniel, you kind of did a review of other people's things in your main talk. Is there anything you wanted to add, or should we move on to questions?
Just a couple of brief things. Like I just loved the introduction of Mamadi with the bringing alchemy to the ordinary. What a wonderful way to describe what one does, and like how that's transformation. And but also for me, that's a link to what Andrew brought in. Every time he did like this and talked about a loaf of bread, I just felt like, this is really yummy, nutritious bread, nourishment. And I loved his image of, because when he was talking about that, everybody has this scaling out impulse. Oh, wonderful idea. How do we scale it out? Scale it up. But then he gave me a new, I normally talk about scaling out. He called it something else, growing by replication. But I loved the idea of growing by fermentation, of expanding and becoming a mycelium, so to speak. And in both Christians and Christian, what a legend. I just love what you're doing, and it's a big discovery. Thank you so much for your presentation. And both presentations highlighted for me the involvement in capacity building, in getting people involved and giving them skills how to connect with food again, how to grow food, how to process it, and that's nourishment of relationship, of like ultimately what I heard Mamadi talking about was how do we re-enter into the community of life and live in right relationships. And yeah, wonderful evening. Thank you.
Fantastic. So we're going to move into some questions. You've all been posting questions. Thank you very much. And and we'll take it in turns, me and Yumna choosing. But I'm going to ask Keith. Keith, if you might unmute your microphone and ask your question.
My question was, are there any good policy examples for someone to propose to city councils within urban and suburban communities?
Yeah, so if you imagine you've just been elected to your local government and you're going in and you can start drafting policies that are going to accelerate our move towards a regenerative Ubuntu food culture. You've got your hands on the policy steering wheel. What would you do, Daniel?
Well, direct example, the guy I mentioned earlier who is trying, like he's a local organic farmer selling at the local food farmers market and having a few other outlets. And he's setting up an organic chicken business. And the process that he's meeting in the local government isn't like in Liège, but it's regulations that have been written for large agro-industry, that a small organic farmer, local farmer, simply cannot keep up with while doing his work. So I think that lobbying local policymakers to insist that there are different rules for different scales of enterprise and remind them that that grows local employment and multipliers in the local economy is a key bit.
Thank you. Thank you. Christian, where would you start? What would be the first policies you think need to be brought in to get this going? You're muted.
First of all, we noticed that in Belgium, the local authorities own a lot of agricultural land, between 10% and 20% of the total amount of agricultural land. And they can use it better than they do now. For the moment, when they rent it to anyone without any condition. If they sell it, they will sell it as high as possible. So for instance, with our policy council, with the 24 municipalities, we want to set rules that if you are a public, a municipality is selling a land that it owns, it will engage in not participating to, how do you say that? I'm sorry, I'm losing my word. Not selling, they engage into selling it to the market price. You know, not higher, not participating to, you know, the chase for the higher possible price, and they will give conditions before selling it, ecological conditions, for instance, of how will it be cultivated. That's one important thing that they can do. And the other very important things that they can do is about the canteens that they run. They can really adapt the public market rules to make sure that it's sustainable food that will nourish as well the people in the schools, in the nurseries, in the hospitals, and so on. So they have really a great power about it, and they are showing now in Liège that it's possible to do it.
Thank you. And Councillor D. Mama D, I mean, like as in you've just been made a councillor with the power to make decisions.
I was thinking, is that me? Right. Well, I feel that a very critical policy for a local council is to rethink allotments. The idea of the distribution of earth space to residents, to encourage the involvement in producing food, I think, and also more food education, more nourishment education in schools and colleges as a matter of routine, because the act of seeing one's own hand involved in the growth, the whole growth cycle, the planting through to harvesting, is such an incredible experience for everybody to have. And I think enables people to have a, to understand their involvement in and the potential to nourish themselves and each other very differently. So I think it's really important at schools and colleges, as a matter of fact, this kind of education is possible, but also that the earth space is made available so that people can actually practice. I don't like the binary between producer and consumer, because I think everybody produces and consumes at some level. The person in the kitchen is producing from their raw materials, yeah. And if we're widening it to nourishment, then we're definitely all producers and consumers. So I think to make those things more available to all people is really, really important. Yeah, those are the policies that I would be
Thank you.
for.
Thank you. And just to point out as well, the chat is on fire with great ideas, loads of links to lots of great things to read. And just to point out to you, in case you don't know before, at the end, if you go down to the next to the chat box, there's 3 little dots next to the smiley face. And if you click on that, it says save chat, and then you can save the whole thread at that stage so that you have it for your later digestion when you've got a bit more time. Andrew, you've just joined Fife Council, been made mayor of, whether Fife Council has a mayor, I don't know, but you are now at the policy helm. What kind of things might you change to make this all more possible?
Well, I'm going to beg to be Minister of Agriculture in the devolved administration of Scotland rather than just Fife, because
go on then.
My policy intervention is a sort of national level one, even though we do a lot of work at the local level, and I absolutely agree with the previous suggestions. And it is this, well, it's twofold really, but the second bit is more important than the first in some ways. I want to change the basis of agricultural support. Farmers get subsidies or support of various kinds. Historically, it's been on the basis of production subsidies and then changing to land area payments and so on. And now in England, it's been changed to a little bit of environmental tinkering, but nothing actually to do with producing healthy food, sadly. So I want to immediately stop enabling the use of artificial fertilizers with their catastrophic global warming potential, and charging people, in other words, taxing them to stop them doing that, and hypothecate the money to supporting agroecological transition. But in order to have a rational basis on which to change the whole system of agricultural support, which I think is important, we are working on, and I would like to see implemented as soon as possible, a new metric for valuing farm output, which is the number of people nourished per hectare rather than the number of tons of produce per hectare. And in addition to the number of people nourished, we want to measure the number of species supported or nourished, because that is a marker of biodiversity remediation, and also the number of good jobs, which takes into account the potential for people taking back a little bit of control over their personal provisioning and nourishment. Now, it's difficult to work on these metrics, but it's really important that we have them. And if we did, then it would actually transform the work of farming away from commodification to something which just sounds more agreeable to almost everybody who actually hears it, which is the idea that farmers could rediscover their age-old calling to feed their fellow citizens from the fields near where they live. And that model of a community that is within reason, and I understand about bioregions and things that we can't grow locally, but within reason, provisioning in itself on the basis of self-sufficiency, but also of fair trade, so that everyone in the system is paid fairly and nourished equally well.
Beautiful, thank you. There you go, Keith. There's a few policy ideas for you. Yumna, is there a question that you've picked out that you'd like to ask?
Yeah, I'm going to quickly ask this question about what does a food council or what does a food policy do? What is it? And then I'm going to ask about youth involvement, because I think it's a really good question. But yeah, does anyone want to take that? What does a food council do, or what it is?
That's probably for Christian, isn't it? Because you were talking about the food councils.
Yes, first of all, it's really a way to connect people of the food system that you usually don't know each other, don't know what are each other's realities, and try to start collaboration. So practically, what can you do with that? As I said, you can work on, for instance, of protecting agricultural land. You can work on food policies regarding the canteens. You can use it to spread systems that can really make a regenerative and fairer food system. For instance, customer-supported agriculture is really spreading very fast in our region, and I think a food policy council can really a good way of spreading these kind of good practices. And a project like Cria Farm, like this project, the city of Liège gave a terrain freely for 20 years for vegetable growers. If one city gives the example, the 24 others can follow this example and do the same kind of things. And I will give a last example. I talked earlier about the need for a vegetable cannery. If we want to process local vegetables for the canteens, but you cannot build such a vegetable cannery just for one municipality. It's better to build it for the 24 municipalities, so you can gather the fundings together with the 24 municipalities, and you can use it for the hospitals, the schools, and so on this whole territory. So you can build a strategy of really bringing together the finance and also use these new infrastructure for a bigger territory. Those are a few examples.
Thank you. There's a question that Jackie Ferguson has asked. Jackie, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, we noticed in our group that when you put the Menti poll up, it was a complete demographic that was missing from this session, and it was the 18 to 25-year-olds. And we wondered why that was, because they are the group that should be involved. They're the sort of young ones that are going to be in a position to take visions forward. And just what everybody's thoughts were. It seems to be that you can get kids involved, no problem. I mean, I have worked with our local school at the Eco Committee, and children are always very keen. And then there's great groups. I was at the session that Yumna led, the young being led by young people, and it was just incredible. It was amazing, the things that Yumna and guys were doing. So teenagers, young children, and then there's this gap where people fall out the loop. And I've noticed it in ours. I mean, I live in Isle of Lewis, where we have an actual dearth of people of that age, because they tend to go away off the island to the mainland to do education or to work. And sometimes they'll come back and have their families and raise them on the island, but then the whole cycle starts again. They go away and then they come back. So we've got a missing group, and we wondered if other people felt that, and if there was any way of getting people of that age involved.
Thank you. It's one of the things I'm always quite impressed when I go to Liège, particularly to the Nouvelle Liège Festival, Christian, is the number of young people who were involved. Maybe we can start and then go round. Yeah. So who would like to start with this one? How do we interest 18 to 25s in taking an active role in reimagining the food system? Who'd like to start?
I don't mind starting just briefly to say that there 18 to 25-year-olds are not homogenous by any means, and and that diversity can be used to, I think, to good end, so that there's a lot of kind of internal education that can take place. And I'm thinking here about the 18 to 25-year-olds who are already cultivating. I'm thinking globally, who are already in the system of growing or processing that which nourishes, and how much role they can have of sharing their experiences and their concerns and their challenges with those who are less involved. I think there is a kind of appreciation of the value of food within different audiences. There was once a young man who referred to himself as the chickenpreneur, chickenpreneur or something like this. I don't know if people ever came across him. He used to go around to chicken shops to assess them. But I thought I really wished I could have met him to have added metrics to his assessment in terms of where they were getting their potatoes and chicken and what have you. So I think there's always creative possibilities there. I put in the chat about my daughter who's 19, who's always, I guess she's always accompanied me to talks and things like this. And so she started doing her own campaigning, but people are not expecting to hear from that age. And so they don't hear, we don't hear. Yeah. So even if it is being articulated, what are we actually doing? How are we encouraging our ability to listen and to hear young people and their different articulations, be it from a simple thing like complaining about school dinner, which is also an articulation about part of the food system, to actually advocating for significant change like access to space to grow for themselves.
Daniel.
Well, I put in the chat one it's not just about food systems, but how do we engage young people? One project which is called the then crossed out possible future. And it's an animation project that comes out of Argentina that just presents a systemic analysis of the mess we're in, but also presents visions of the future that are these bioregionally regenerative food and all sorts of things cycled more at the regional scale projections. And just simply because of the way they use animation and storytelling and the art of capturing through visual images, it's designed to speak to that younger group. And then also, if you don't know Formidable Vegetable by Yield in Australia, for example, is just one example of, in Australia, there's a whole movement of permaculturists becoming, like, also as musicians, starting bands and singing about the fun of growing vegetables and the fun of eating local food. And that's how you get the young people involved.
Beautiful. Thank you. Christian. You're muted.
Okay, sorry, I could not get back to my mic. Yes, as you said, Rob, we have lots of young adults involved in the Nourrir Liège Festival. Actually, we have two festivals going on in Liège. We have the Nourrir Liège Festival and the Nourrir Liège Campus, which is really specially organized for young adults who are at university or high school and so on. And this year, Rob was the patroning this festival, so we were very happy with that. And indeed, we could reach 3,000 young adults with this festival. But we have many other specific other activities for people of this age. For instance, we are partner of Climact, which is a summer university. And every year in July, 100 young adults engage in transition with this summer university. So we see that the participation is really impressive from them. There are many things that you can do. And Rob, you also visited at the University of Liège the Center for Social Economy. And there they have a master in management of social enterprises and cooperatives. And this year they doubled the number of students that are following these courses. So you see that this generation is engaging more and more massively in social entrepreneurship and in transition. That's very encouraging. And one last thing about the younger, the children that are at school, I spoke a lot about the canteens, but of course, bringing quality, local, sustainable food is good, but it's not enough. It has to be brought up with education of these children to taste, and also about education about the various dimensions of a sustainable food system. So yeah, that's something that's very important at this age too.
Thank you. Yeah, the last time I was in Liège, I went to a fantastic food garden being created by students around the university as well, which was really impressive. Andrew, I think you were our last person on this one.
Yeah, probably it's longer ago for me than for all the rest of you to remember what life was like at that age. And thinking about that makes me agree with Mamadi that there's quite a lot of other living, or whoever said it in the chat, to be done at those ages. Certainly, I seem to have other things on my mind than food most of the time in between those ages, and particularly it made me think that the way to the hearts of people of that age is often through through a kind of energetic activism. For instance, you know, I mean, I spent those years protesting against the Vietnam War and similar things, but and there are plenty of causes of a political nature similar which need support at the moment. But in terms of the food system, I actually think that the bread, the sort of revival in the UK at least, and probably in the US as well, of a vibrant small craft baking scene has often been peopled by very young bakers who grasp the mix of the potential for doing something really active and meaningful with their hands, as well as the fascination of the mix of sciences involved. We did a campaign in the Real Bread campaign. We had an early campaign to try and engage activism on the part of younger people who would have the brass neck, the gall, if you like, to indulge in our Stick One on Them campaign, which was to provide people with little sticky labels of the missing ingredients and processes in industrial bread, and to go into supermarkets and just make good this information deficit in an active kind of way. We did actually print sheets of those, and some of them were stuck on before people were ushered out of the supermarkets for defacing other people's products. But it's that kind of thing that can help people to begin conversations and voyages of discovery for themselves, which are also fun and make you feel better about the world. So I would say get hands in dough and get people onto the streets shouting loudly about all the disasters visited on us by the current food system. And there is also, there are lots of organizations that have been mentioned already in the chat, but the Slow Food Youth Network is alive and well in Scotland, I know, and probably in other places.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that, and thank you so much to all our speakers. Unfortunately, we're going to have to draw our conversation to a close, although clearly we could keep this conversation going for a long time. And yeah, this topic is I'm very passionate about this topic, and I can speak about this topic for a really, really long time. So if you have any questions, just send them over to me. I would be more than happy to answer it, especially from the youth perspective.